are people going to create AIs for food industry or the health industry?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it. Like legal and some white collar areas were big areas early on where people started building custom models and early versions of agentic workflows. Yeah, I think they're coming for every industry.
Hey guys, this is Mike and welcome to the podcast. You know, if you're like me, you probably are wondering, where are we in the current state of things with AI? It seems like things are moving so fast. There's so much news breaking every day and things are changing so quickly. It's really hard to keep up. So I thought I would catch up with my friend Derrick Harris, who I've known for a long time, who is a longtime tech reporter who's followed the world of cloud computing, big data, and now AI. He's been following AI for about a decade. And so I really wanted to ask him, where are we with things? What are the key terms people are using? Who are the key players? What's happening and what's important right now? And that's what this conversation is all about. So if you wanted to get a catch up on the state of AI, this is a great conversation for that. It isn't really super food specific, but I feel like if you're in food or whatever industry you're in, you kind of want to know what's going on with the broader space. And so that's what we do here. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you haven't already subscribed to the Spoon Podcast or Spoonful of AI, which we're cross-publishing this into, please do so now. I hope to have more of these catch-ups on AI in the next week or two with some other experts. I'm heading to Japan tomorrow, but hopefully we'll publish a podcast or two while I'm there. So, all right, folks, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Derrick Harris. All right, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Derrick Harris. I'm currently the technology storyteller at a company called Vast Data, but I've had a long career in tech journalism and working inside software companies, and most recently, before Vast, spending almost 4 years at Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah, and we got to know each other when we were both at Gigome, which is a rest in peace, a now defunct tech blog. You were the cloud.
The URL's still there, just for the record.
It is still there. And like, I mean, I guess they're still alive, but I feel like they're a shadow of what they were before. Fair. But you were at the time the cloud analyst and journalist in many ways. And so, but I always find it interesting because you were not you may be a journalist by training, but I know you were a lawyer as well, right? You were training to be a lawyer at some point. Or you went to law school. I guess you went to
law school. Yes, while working as a tech journalist, and I decided, rightly or wrongly, for better or for worse, that tech journalism and tech was a much more rewarding career for me than being a lawyer would have been. So.
And we all knew what a promising world the world of media was back then, right? Like, and we'd all be rolling in dollars by now.
I'll be honest. I feel like I got in at the right time and got out at the right time sometimes. That's just how it feels. So, I mean.
Yeah. And I think you have been working at these interesting places, which I think is representative of the modern journalist, where you are working embedded within interesting companies. Like you were at A16Z, which for those you don't know is probably the most well-known or one of the most well-known venture capital firms in the world. And they have an editorial. They had an editorial operation. You were part of that.
Yes. Yeah. I think they set the bar for editorial operations and probably marketing overall for the venture industry. I mean, God, since 2009. And then, so yeah, I was a part of that from 2021 until just recently.
And I think it's interesting because in my space, food tech, there's a group called Ag Funder, and they actually have a media side as well. So it is always interesting to me to see venture capitalists do storytelling, but I think it does make sense. There's a somewhat symbiotic relationship to try and craft a narrative when you're investing lots of money.
Oh yeah, well, and also it got super competitive. I mean, you could go into a long discussion about tech booms and interest rates and just like money management, I think. But at the end of the day, it's like so many venture funds were launched at some point. You know, when we were both at Gigome, there were a handful, right? When I started as a tech journalist or started at Gigome, I mean, A16Z was just launching, and then. You know, and there were some big ones, but I mean, now there's thousands, right? And I think so being heard, especially at like the seed round, especially for early stage companies, like getting heard above the noise and convincing people to take your money and your guidance and your just whatever you bring to the table versus what anyone else brings. Yeah, I think it got super competitive, and you just now, I mean, it's by default, like everyone has an editorial team and a marketing team and is trying to at least do something to get heard above the noise.
Yeah, I do think that we're seeing like the go-go salad days of venture capital. Definitely, I don't want to say they're in our past, but I think there's a little bit of like kind of like a winter we're still kind of going through, certainly in the food tech space, but I think other areas, but with the exception of maybe AI, which we're going to talk about, because I feel like there's
Yeah.
tons of money going into that space. I feel like at the expense of other spaces, because I do truly feel like AI is going to change a lot of things. I don't know, you probably feel the same, but what this conversation is going to be about is really to talk about where we are with AI, because you've been documenting a lot of it. But before we get to that, when I was working with you at GigHome, you were documenting the world of cloud. And I always like the way you frame things. Those early days of cloud computing is around 2009, 2010. And can you talk a little bit about that and then how you kind of migrated to new topics? Like, why were you on cloud computing? Was it something that really interested you?
The honest answer is that I started as in tech media in like 2003, and I fell into it basically. I have a journalism degree,
I didn't
but
know you were at it that
I
long. I thought you always seemed a lot younger than that.
yeah, well, thanks, Mike. but but
I'm
yes,
older than you, so yeah.
but yeah, so I kind of fell into it just like I needed a job out of college, and
Yeah.
I moved to California, and I was like looking, and I ended up working at a publication focused on what was called grid computing, which is like basically trying to take networks of computers and use their resources at off hours essentially. And what happened is when Amazon Web Services launched in like 2006, it was like virtualization, and then Amazon Web Services happened, and this grid world kind of became much less interesting when you could just rent resources, rent computing
Yeah.
whenever you
Yeah.
needed it. Like, and just a much simpler and a thing designed for it, a platform designed to do it with a credit card. And so, that sucked a lot of wind out of the sails of like the grid movement, but it was super exciting, right? So then the cloud just became the thing. I kind of naturally migrated over there, and then as that was new and interesting, and you saw new companies coming up, and Amazon growing into this now, like one of the biggest, if not the biggest IT companies, as well as e-commerce companies in the
The
world.
store for everything,
Was,
and also the one of the biggest IT companies.
yeah, it was just really exciting, and from there, I think cloud helped introduce. This. There's a combination of things. It was, I think, the web just took off, and every site was generating so much data. Mobile took off. All of these things took off, and so from there came, came like data, and big data became a thing, and companies started thinking, oh my God, we have to capture all this data. We need to data. We have to make data driven decisions. We can start doing.
What's so funny is I feel like now I still heard the same thing. Data is where it's like data is everything. And do you remember at the GigOhm conferences? I don't know who started saying it, but like Ohm really honed in on this phrase, data is the new oil. It feels like data still is everything when I hear people talk about it, where we are now.
Yeah, well, it is. I think the difference was back then. It was one, the tech was kind of, I think, laborious to really do anything interesting with it, and there weren't a lot of places that had the engineering chops to really pull off these super complex data pipelines and data systems. I spent a lot of time and wrote a lot of words about them, but at the end of the day, it was it was probably, you can think about the companies that really excelled at that sort of thing and managing those types of systems. But yeah, but with AI, data is back in full. I always think of AI now as like the culmination of big data, right? Everything we're talking about, things that seem like pipe dreams, and when people are talking about what you could do with data theoretically beyond like straight up business intelligence, the things I think a lot of people ended up actually using it for, or a lot of orgs actually ended up using it for. A lot of that is happening to some sense right now with AI, and it's just like, it's been really, it's been just a natural trajectory, and really interesting to watch how these, like the infrastructure came, and then the data came, and then all these things combined. And we can get into the history of AI a little bit, but it's like there was just like I think there was a culmination of things, and they all hit around the transformer paper and ChatGPT, and it's been off to the races ever since. So
I feel like when AI really crossed over into the broader consumer consciousness was everyone had to pay attention or started to paying attention to ChatGPT. But I mean, there was stuff happening in the background before that. Like OpenAI was a thing and around before then. And were you following it before? And were you kind of tracking before ChatGPT was announced? And what did you see happen there?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following AI since about 2012 when like deep learning, the term deep learning just became a
Yeah.
thing, and that was kind of the that was like the catalyst, I think, for everything that's happening right now, in the sense that that was when, I mean, the very abbreviated and reductive explanation of that is it was kind of when we realized you could just scale the compute resources and use GPUs to do these calculations that previously, you couldn't scale these models, right? You couldn't scale these architectures and GPUs, and figuring out how to do that with GPUs just opened up all these new possibilities. And from that point on, it's been just steady progress along the way. And so, yeah, OpenAI launched. I don't remember when it launched exactly. I want to
And
say
that was, by the way, the final
2014.
nail in the coffin of Intel, in a sense, right? Mobility was the first nail in the coffin of Intel, and I think the move to GPUs was the second nail in the processor king.
I declined. I mean, well, I don't know. The government owns a stake in Intel now, so who really knows? Who knows how that turns out? But so that was a long, like there was this natural trajectory, I think, from about 2012 to 2022 when ChatGPT launched. In the meantime, yeah, I don't remember exactly when OpenAI launched. It might have been 2014, 2015, but they were doing some very interesting things. And then when I want to say it was maybe 2017, 2018, they came out with GPT-2, and that was the model where if you were paying attention, like I was, they were saying, well, this one might be too dangerous to release. We have to really be careful about this. This model's so smart, it can do so many things, like we don't know what it could do. I mean, maybe it's just great marketing.
Whatever happened to that hesitancy, though? Like, I feel like that's gone to the wayside because they see dollar signs now.
I think it moved to Anthropic, but yeah. So I think people were paying attention, and then GPT-3 was maybe 2021, and that was really actually released. They had an API, and more developers could easily get access to it and start playing with it. So if you were plugged in there too, you started to see the writing on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the image models were starting to pop up too out of labs, and it was like,
yeah,
you could see. But I think, yeah, just ChatGPT was just so eye-opening.
For those who are not computer scientists, an API is important because it allows folks to write to and access the compute engine, the AI, and use it in their own software.
Yeah, it's API's application programming interface, and it's just a way of there are protocols by which like software and applications can communicate with one another. So I mean, and the web as we know it is set. I mean, like APIs have been around for a long time. Like, operating systems use them. They were used, but when all these SaaS applications started hitting the web, software as a service, I mean, like literally everything you do online now, almost you can consider a SaaS application or a web application, I guess. They needed a way to communicate because you couldn't have, if you were using, I'm just going to pick examples here, but if you were using Box and Salesforce and whatever, maybe some sort of database as a service, and you needed to move data from one area to another and analyze it and otherwise pull and communicate. Amazon Web Services we talked about earlier with cloud computing, like that made infrastructure available, like servers and storage available via an API. So you could call those from local applications or from your own applications, and it just really opened up so many things because now so many different applications could talk to each other across the network versus having to be local to talk or have the custom drivers and this whole, all these arcane ways of doing things. So,
and then ChatGPT comes out. It was kind of a bomb that dropped. I think it surprised Google to a certain degree. I think the ingenuity around ChatGPT was basically putting a human chat interface on top of this powerful AI engine that hadn't really been done before. So we all could do queries in a natural language interface, like we were talking to Alexa, or we were doing a Google search, but now we're doing it on top of this powerful AI, and that shook everything up.
Yeah, that's an understatement. I mean, it's funny because like in 2021, 2022, early 2022 even, I was working on editing some articles with some authors, and we were talking about foundation models, and we were talking about GPT-3 and Dolly and some of these early iterations of things that were out there, but it was like, so there people were interested, but it was not, and then just you fast forward like 10 months, 9 months, and the attention, the zeitgeist, the money, the everything was just through the roof. And it hasn't slowed down at all. I mean, maybe a little, but
It's interesting, like so much VC money started to pursue it, but people like you were paying attention. I think A16Z was paying attention, but like it seems like a lot of fast follow money came in because they weren't thinking about AI as much until ChatGPT came out. I don't want to say these VCs weren't as smart as like A16Z, but the venture capitalists that really know what's going on with hard tech were paying attention, and the money is already going to be there, but it's really just even doubled down on it more.
yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, listen, I like so many of these things, if you ask me, had been the thing with AI was, so in the early 2010s, when deep learning really hit, there was a little bit, there was definitely a spike in attention. And at that point, Google, all these companies were acquiring all these researchers. They were acqui-hiring their companies. They were pulling them out of labs. They were doing all this stuff.
DeepMind got bought by Google.
DeepMind got bought by Google. Every one of these like leading researchers who were leading labs at big universities, or a large number of them, ended up going inside places like Facebook/Meta, Google.
Yeah,
Twitter was buying companies. Just everyone was buying up and trying to get these people and these brains, but there hadn't been a super successful, I would say, AI company, just like a AI software company. OpenAI was still very much a research project. Depending on who you ask, ChatGPT was kind of an accident that it happened to take off like it did. And I just think people knew it was happening, but you have to see a product. You have to see what is the viable application of these technologies.
True.
And AI was just so, especially generative AI, like these GPT models, was just so different. Like what it could do.
The consumer facing stuff had hit kind of a lull. Like, I mean, Siri came out in 2010, 2011. I can't remember exactly when, and it just didn't do anything interesting for 10 years. It was interesting at the time, like, wow, Siri. And then Alexa came out in 2020 or 2014. And then Alexa was just iterating slowly. So there wasn't like really interesting stuff for like, I feel like 8 to 9 years. And then ChatGPT came out.
Yeah. But I think a part of it was, I mean, there are any number of reasons, right? But one of them, I think, certainly was just the capabilities of the model. Because although you could give voice commands to Alexa, and it used AI to process and do some of that translation, they couldn't understand a lot. It couldn't give an off the cuff, a quote unquote off the cuff response. It couldn't. Everything was still very programmatic, and as a result, you were just so limited in what you could do with something like an Echo device. And Siri, I mean, it's just been a laughing stock for a long time. I don't even use it on my phone. I don't think, like, it's just
it was almost like the limitations of when you call into like a customer service line and you had to use very programmatic certain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alexa wasn't that different. You needed a certain wake word, and it was very regimented. But now with ChatGPT, it was anything, just like you're talking to a friend, and it could handle it. I mean, they weren't great at first, but they're getting so much better.
Right. And it was just like, again, it was one, I think there are a couple things. One is, if you like the computer science terminology would be like, everything previously was deterministic, where you knew the answer you were going to get. A computer was designed to do the same thing every time.
Yeah.
Versus probabilistic, where you don't know what you're going to get. Like you would write a prompt for an image or for a text based output, and who knows? Like you could try to direct it, but the model is going to do what the model is going to do, and that was some of the fun. I think it was fun. I think people enjoy it, and I think they very much enjoyed experimenting with when it happened. So yeah, that was just like a whole new way of thinking about what you could even do with a computer. And I mean, from like writing a poem about pick any subject under the sun, basically, to like analyzing a spreadsheet or a legal document. It was this very weird confluence of consumer, business, and infrastructure innovation that I think we just haven't seen anything like that in a long, long time.
So when you're what I liked about your analysis back at GitGum, you help crystallize for people like me, like who are the major players, where they were sitting on the ecosystem map or in the stack, whatever term we want to use. I feel like you do that you're doing that to a certain degree with AI now. So if you were to look at the AI landscape, who are the key? I mean, you talked about foundation models, maybe the Metas and the OpenAIs. They are the key kind of players, or how do you kind of analyze and who do you describe as the key players in the ecosystem or the categories of players in the ecosystem?
Yeah. So I mean, if you started at the listen, I will not comment on the fact that I work for a company selling AI infrastructure. But I mean, really, like, listen, if you're to look at who's moving markets right now, it's like Nvidia on the GPU and the compute side.
Hardware,
That is
processor.
yeah, the compute processing. It's Nvidia. I mean, and I mean, obviously, I think even your listeners, even if they're not computer scientists or deep in tech, like you've heard of Nvidia. It's at any given day, it's the most valuable company in the world, right? Or it was at some point.
And
then
AMD to a lesser degree, right?
Well, the way GPU, like Nvidia for training models. So when you think back to like a lot of the big hubbub when generative AI first took off, it was like they have to train these models. It takes months to train these models, and they need all these GPUs, and it's all this data, and that's where this huge corpuses of data, and that's where all these lawsuits were coming from because they were scraping data, or they were pulling data, and that was where all of that came from. All these regulations were coming out or being proposed around training models and what was allowed or not allowed around how you could train these models. And like and Nvidia absolutely owns training models, like
Okay.
100%. When it gets to inference, yes, like you can, like OpenAI just announced a big deal with AMD. You Google, so you can run inference on hardware other than Nvidia GPUs. You run on AMD. Google has what it calls tensor processing units, which can run inference. Microsoft and Amazon both have their own custom hardware for running inference. Yes, with the inference is when like it's serving the output of the model. So after the model's trained and it's ready to like take requests, right? It's ready to just answer user queries or prompts. It's just it's part of just an application stack like any other application to some degree. That's an inference workload. So if you go into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, tell me about Napoleon," let's say, that's an inference. That's an inference workload. So then it has to go and pull the data and analyze and decide which words and how to phrase its response. But that's an inference workload. And now, yeah. And so,
but making them smart on the world and sucking in the data and kind of that was all where Nvidia really specialized on the training side.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Nvidia's GPUs were just like they built the software stack on the GPUs that helped it, and also the hardware. I mean, they were just the highest performance. Everyone uses the Nvidia programming tools and like the super high bandwidth, super high everything. So that's why Nvidia still owns that part of it. But now, when usage is so high, and when if people follow along, AI agents are a thing, and reasoning models, right, or chain of thought models, where the models don't just give like a single shot response. You can see them thinking. They'll tell you what they're doing. They'll multi-step things. All of these things take more and more compute to execute, and so now inference is the big thing. And when you see a lot of these big deals happening, these people talking about billions or trillions of dollars being invested in AI data centers, like that's largely inference. That's because you need to be able to support people using the models. Training comes and goes. Training could be a 3-month process, and then those GP then it's done with.
But inference is the continued. One is like almost OpEx versus OpEx, right? OpEx, like operating over time, is going to be a lot more inference when you're building it out. It's kind of that CapEx side.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked about Nvidia as the key power player in many ways in GPU, and then we have all the foundation model guys like the OpenAIs and the Metas. How does that landscape shape out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's still and everyone is kind of specializing in their own things, and you could a couple of years ago it seemed they were all. It was like this benchmark test almost. Everyone was just comparing which model was best across whatever benchmark or test, and now I think we're starting to see their product strategies really shape up. And I think you could say OpenAI has one, like I think the vast majority of consumer mindshare, and with ChatGPT, and it's really branching out into buying, like being able to buy products straight out of ChatGPT. I think they just announced they're going to allow erotica coming up. Like they are. OpenAI is becoming like, it's becoming like the commercial AI provider. I think Anthropic's Claude models and Anthropic overall, I think, is really good at. People really like it for coding and programming, I think, and I mean also just as a pure language model, it's really good. But and then Meta started releasing this Llama family of open source models or open weight models, and there are now, a lot of the Chinese labs and other labs are releasing open source models, and that's becoming increasingly important. But I think, I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it really today is. Apologies if I'm leaving anyone out, but it's like it's OpenAI,
Grok X as well, right? Like,
Grok is there, XAI, yes, and then Google. Obviously, I was leaving out because Google Gemini is like big, and also that's lest we forget, so many people use Google that it's one of those things where, like, yeah, if you're a Google shop, it was kind of like buying Microsoft back in the day. Everyone had Office and all these things. If you're using Google internally and you like Gemini, like, it's just there.
What about Amazon and Microsoft?
Not so much success. I mean, Microsoft famously partnered very closely with OpenAI, on a lot of things, and then that's been kind of back and forth. But Microsoft owns GitHub, which has this Copilot programming model, and product. But I think for general purpose foundation models, no, they haven't been. Yeah, I think Amazon. And I don't want to speak for Amazon, but I think Amazon's pretty happy to serve and host models and train models, because they still make a decent profit on renting out those GPUs. They don't care what you're using them for. I'm sure they're working on them internally, and they have their own to serve their own applications, but they're not like the foundation models. When you think of foundation models, it's like Llama, whatever the GPT version is, whatever the Claude version is, and like Gemini. I think those are really the way. And then the Chinese labs as well. Those are the ones that people really pay attention to.
I have to say, just to comment on OpenAI, like the direction they've gone is kind of disappointing for those who thought they were trying to be, hey, let's build an AI that doesn't harm the world. The fact it's almost like the Facebookification of OpenAI with the release of Sora 2. Like, it's an addictive social app, like creating like all these fake videos in the world. What do they call it? AI slop. I don't know. It's just kind of disappointing to me.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm not so concerned about it. I mean, to me, I think of AI as like just another way of doing computing or generating whatever you happen to be doing. And who knows whether these products even last, number one. I mean, Google famously rolled out any number of products that just kind of didn't get traction, didn't go anywhere. It's
Google Plus.
It's not, it's just not outside the circles. It's not outside the realm of possibility. But I don't know. I just kind of look at it like these things happen. They're gonna. I mean, this is just the way it works. It's almost like whatever. People printed books I didn't want to read, but so be it. That was the medium.
Yeah.
So if there's value to it, it's.
Keeping on the kind of the stack going up a little bit. So we have the foundation models, but there are businesses building now on top of these new and interesting things. So how do you look at that? Like, if you're looking at the kind of the cloud analogy and the vertical software compute stack, what's above the kind of foundation models from a business perspective?
I mean, that I think is where the applications and to some degree agents come into play. So that's where, because the comparison I would make between cloud and AI was, cloud was like changed how and where you hosted and built applications, but it was still basically the same, and how you access resources, but it was still basically the same pieces. You had storage and compute and a network, and it was, you know what I mean? It was the same in a database. It was the same, more or less, pieces. The models are like a new piece to that stack. And but what they fundamentally change, they do change how you build these things, absolutely how you build applications, and they change the type of like underlying infrastructure that's necessary to run these applications. But you're almost limited by what you can imagine or how what you can conceive of doing, because you can now, not just entering a prompt bar, but I mean you can construct AI agents, and they're getting better every day to undergo complex workflows and execute stuff on your behalf. You could write a whole backend for a web application, and you could. I mean, and these are, and again, these is kind of, but these are still like, how do we do the things we currently do, just faster and more automated a lot of times. I think we haven't yet, and there are ways, and there are places where, despite all the talk about bubbles and whatnot, it's like, look, people are getting real true value from AI. Like
Yeah.
they are, and it's a legitimately valuable market. And so, I mean, I'm not a financial expert, but I just think like that to me, when the bubble talk to me is always, listen, yes, there's a lot of money, there are a lot of weird deals happening, but it, like the use cases are there, and we have some very concrete, valuable use cases already: coding, image generation, any number of vertical specific applications. And I think arguably we still haven't seen what the most interesting things are going to be. Like, what does it look like in 10 years when we have a generation of kids who grew up using language models and video models
Yeah.
and image models, and they come in and they're like, they have a whole new way of looking at how you would carry out, business tasks, but like anything, I think that's where we haven't totally cracked the code on what the really killer use cases are. But I don't know. Like, I love using them for I like using video and image models for just for fun. Like
Yeah.
they're just fun to create things that otherwise you would need a whole crew and actors and the whole nine yards to do. You could do it in 5 minutes. It's
The conversation a lot, and kind of getting to specific where I spend a lot of my time in the food world with regards to AI. Will there be vertically focused AI models? It seems to me like agentic AI, like that's where you could get some really interesting kind of vertical knowledge specialization. What are you thinking about with regards to, hey, are people going to create AIs for food industry or the health industry? I know that Google had their protein folding, which has all sorts of like applications in kind of pharma research, but like, what are you thinking there?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it. So you could look. I mean, like legal and some white collar areas were big areas early on where people started building custom models and what they were called early versions of agentic workflows. You could, I think they're coming for every industry, and one of the things you're seeing is, so you have the, like, because the way models work a lot of times is like it's expensive to call OpenAI every time you need to do something. Like, you don't want to call OpenAI or Anthropic every time you have some mundane thing that they're way too powerful to handle. And so people, or orgs will, I say people too much when I mean like, companies, but they will run what they call like a mixture of experts model. And so that might be where you're basically routing this task to the right model for the job. It could be a small open source model running locally. It could be one of the big foundation models. It could be some fine-tuned version of something that you trained on your own data, like that. And that's where these really vertical specific things comes in, or even company specific things where where I have this model and I'm training it on my data, and trying to make it so that that's really optimized for my use case, because of all the things that a foundation model can scrape and pick up from the web, it can't pick up my private data, right? And so, and that's where my real value is if I'm a company or an organization. And so I think we'll start to see a lot of that start to happen and it's really a matter of like, once we master again, like more of the open source and more of the local hosting of models, and then also just figuring out these workflows, like, well, how do we put AI agents in front of everyone in an organization, or a large number of people in an organization, and not a software developer who can kind of think through how to do that in a more native way. I think once that happens, you can envision, and then again, it doesn't have to be, depending on how you define it, it's going to be any sort of use case. But I mean, the simplest thing in the world would be like, not the simplest thing, but would be for any company, food company or whatever, to be like, whatever, you have this whole corpus of data, you've had PDFs, images, videos, earnings reports, all this stuff, right? I mean, just querying that like a database is a is a pretty good start. But beyond that, you mentioned AlphaGo and protein folding, and actually a company just I think it's called H Company, just launched recently, which was some of the people behind AlphaFold and these other like more scientific models. And so I think I think you'll start to see more work being done trained on that sort of data and for those types of workloads specifically. It's just obviously the horizontal and very consumery ones tend to take off first, but
do you think that the foundation models like the OpenAI try to like own a lot of that like revenue and kind of value, or do you think there's going to be software companies and AI companies on top of that, on top of their models, maybe building one, like you said, this found kind of group of experts model that caters to verticals, or do you think it's the foundation guys going to try to capture all that value?
You know what? That's a good question. My sense would be that they don't have a lot of interest in capturing all that value.
Okay.
Because I would look at it like if you made the comparison to, let's say, Amazon Web Services or even Microsoft, they make their money by selling lots of things, like horizontally,
lots of tools to help you do your job better.
Yes, but they don't really, with some exceptions, get into these vertical specific applications because that requires such expertise in the field. And so to train a model to really think through the use cases that would be valuable in any given field, to think about how real work is done by the people who work in that field.
Yeah.
I think they don't have that expertise. And I would think that they don't really want to build that out necessarily. It's great to be, what's the saying? Like in a gold rush, it's great to sell picks, like picks and shovels. Like I think Nvidia and Anthropic and OpenAI and these companies, like they're happy to do what they're good at, and like everyone else can build on top of that. But and they might use those models, they might use other models, they probably will use a combination of models to do this. I always thought it was funny, just not to belabor it, but I remember I would ask people, especially like data startups and data companies back in the day, because the big thing was like someone would come out with an open source or with a company based on an open source project, and they would start to raise a bunch of money and get a bunch of mind share. And then Amazon Web Services would come out and say, oh, hey, we have this managed service now for, pick Hadoop, Elastic, Spark, pick your open sourcing that companies have been formed around. And then people be like, Amazon is whatever. And, you'd ask the companies who are doing this, they're like, listen, we're partners with them. Like we're partners with them. They want to run workloads. They're happy to run our workloads or their workloads, as long as that hardware is getting used and paid for. And I think that's kind of probably how AI shakes out. I mean, it's hard enough work to build these state of the art models and master that and the business around that, than to get into be like, and now we're experts in law and food tech
and farming. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, all right,
it's insane. Yeah.
Well, Derrick, it's always great catching up with you and kind of helping to explain a lot of this and what's happening in a, I don't want to say plain spoken way, because I feel like you dive deep into the technical weeds, but I always appreciate the way you frame things and explain things. It's always very helpful for me.
Hopefully it was clear.
It was. All right. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Derrick Harris, getting caught up on all things AI. Subscribe to the Spoonful of AI podcast to stay on top of everything that's happening in the world of AI, and subscribe to the Spoon if you just want to keep on top of anything that's happening across the broader food tech landscape, from the home to the farm and everywhere in between. Or you can just subscribe to both, quite honestly. So, all right, folks, thanks for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.